Meeting to order. We'll do it again. Call the meeting to order. Okay. Land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that we are on the land and surrounded by water, originally inhabited by indigenous peoples who have traveled this area since time immemorial. This territory is within the lands honored by the Wampum Treaties, agreements between the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, Lenni, Lenape, allied nations, that peacefully share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. Specifically, we would like to acknowledge the presence of Three Fires Confederacy, the Ojibwe, Ottawa, Potawatomi, Huron-Wendat peoples, and we are dedicated to honoring Indigenous history and culture while remaining committed to move forward respectfully with all First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. Any disclosure of pecuniary interest on the agenda as presented to you this afternoon? Hearing none, we will. Delegations, I believe our clerk's going to guide us in the new procedural bylaw 10-minute workshop. So
would you like us there or here? Or?
Oh, no, you can stay right here. Yeah. You're all mic'd and ready to go.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and to the rest of council. So this is called a 10-minute workshop on the procedural bylaw, and I'll try to stick to that. Really not, the purpose of it really isn't to go over all the changes since they were last approved by council, but really to speak more to what the agenda will look like as a result of the procedural bylaw. And this the agenda is revised, will come to council at the first meeting in September 12th. So if we can just pull up the agenda itself. So just a couple things that the councillors will notice are a bit different. The big item being consent agendas. And if we could just scroll to consent agendas. So definitely this will be the first item that looks a bit different for the councillors. The agenda that they will receive on the Thursday, on the published agenda, will have items proposed for consent agenda. And again, those are those non-contentious matters, maybe informational reports that council could look at passing with one resolution as opposed to individually. So when council receives their, and the public receives the agenda Thursday afternoon, there'll be potentially many items or perhaps just a couple items. In this example here, I pulled 3 items, a couple of reports that appeared to be informational and communications for receipt. So all those were placed as proposed items for the consent agenda. At the meeting itself, the chair will ask council if there's any items that they wish to pull from the proposed consent agenda. If there are any items, then those items would be pulled at that time and dealt with separately. But if there are not, if council, if there's no items that council wishes to pull from the proposed consent agenda, then we have a proposed resolution that would approve those items together in one motion. So I don't know if there's any questions on that, but we wanted to give you an example of what that will likely look like when we come to council on September 12th. The other item is that, again, one of the changes to the procedural bylaw was to provide the clerk with discretion to automatically move items on the agenda. In particular, we're thinking of a scenario where there's a delegation that's linked to a report by administration. So no longer will council need to pass a resolution moving that report up to the delegation itself. It will likely appear right on the agenda together under delegation, the report itself. So that may look a bit different for the councillors. And then if we could just move a little bit further on in the agenda, there's a new section, and the new section is called Update for County Council and Boards. And so again, that's going to be an opportunity for the mayor and the deputy mayor to report back on any items occurring at county council, whether a recently attended meeting or an upcoming meeting, but to be able to report back to the rest of council and to Tecumseh residents on a matter of Tecumseh interest. And it's also going to be an opportunity for other members of council who sit on some of the county boards to provide an update. It's generally, this section of the agenda is generally intended to be limited to about 5 minutes for such reports, and usually just of an informational nature, no action or resolutions resulting from that reporting. And then just a reminder, notices of motion procedure is a little bit different under the new bylaw. Notices of motion can certainly still continue to be received by the clerk, either at the meeting or before the meeting. But if the motion is received at the meeting, the notice of motion, if the notice is received either at the meeting or after the agenda has already been published, then the intention under the procedural bylaw is that that item, when first introduced, there'd be no action that evening. It would come back on the next regular agenda for council's deliberation and action. However, the one small change is that if the clerk has been provided with notice of a motion prior to the publication date of the agenda, so prior to the Thursday afternoon publication deadline, and that notice of motion is placed on the published agenda, then come to the Tuesday regular council meeting, council would have the option, if they wish, to deal with that item that night because the public has now had notice at that point. So that's the major change with respect to notices of motion. Delegations, a couple changes for delegations, and they're just related to the timelines. Anyone looking to be a delegation on any topic within council's jurisdiction generally is supposed to give 7 days notice, and that's consistent with how the old bylaw read. For special meetings or for regular meeting agenda items, so those items that are specifically on the regular meeting agenda, a delegation can be filed and a request filed within 24 hours before the meeting. And then if it's a public or statutory meeting, the delegation request can be received up to 3 p.m. of the day of the meeting itself. And then just generally speaking, oh, good, and we have that up there. A further change, so we're in the process of revising the delegation form that's available both online and hard copy as well. The delegation form itself will have that new information for the public, but we'll also have sign off either electronically or in person, sign off by that delegate, acknowledging rules and requirements. And those rules and requirements are in draft there, but they relate to expectations as far as proper behavior and protocols when acting as a delegate to council. These same requirements will be part of a sign-in sheet for those who just come to watch the council meetings starting in September. So those who wish to sit in the gallery and watch the meeting, they're expected to sign in with the clerk. And part of that sign-in will again be an acknowledgement of the general rules relating to proper behavior when inside council chambers. And then finally, during the procedural bylaw subcommittee phase, part of the feedback we received was the desire to educate the public a bit better on the expectations about when they're coming to the council meeting as a delegation. So we don't have it to show just yet, but we're in the final stages of working on that. But we have a general brochure that we'll either send electronically once we've confirmed someone as a delegate to one of the meetings, or when people show up at the council meeting, either to watch the meeting or to appear to be a council, there'll be a general informational brochure, just providing that exactly that general information, what to expect when you're attending at council, and rules of protocol. So that's still, we're still working that into a final draft, but that'll be part of the changes for the first meeting in September. And that's about it. I don't know if any of the council members have any questions, but I just wanted to provide just a general background on what to expect in September, a few different changes.
No questions? I'm just more of a comment. I certainly want to extend my thanks to obviously the clerk's office and your team and Councillor Jobin and Councillor Higginson for chairing the committee. And I know there were several meetings that led up to it. So I certainly want to thank those councillors and certainly the clerk's department for bringing us back to a more modernized approach to our meeting. So. Yep, there we go. So we're going to motion to adopt. Deputy Mayor Bichetti, Councillor Houston. No further questions or comments. All in favor? Opposed, if any? That is carried. Thank you. All right, there's no communications to deal with the members of council on this one. Reports. We have again, legal and our clerks services 2023-21 council staff relations policy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A couple of the items on this evening's agenda are in the nature of housekeeping items, if you will. And this is one such item, the council staff relations policy. Back in May 2017, Bill 68 amended the Municipal Act. In particular, they amended Section 270 of the Act, which directed municipalities across the province to adopt and maintain certain mandatory policies. In particular, the provisions of Section 270 require municipalities to adopt a council staff relations policy with respect to the relationships between members of council and the officers and employees of the municipality. This policy was required as of back of March 1st, 2019, but the town has been remiss to date in formally adopting this policy. And so that is something we're looking to address as part of the agenda this evening. So as a result, policy has been prepared and is attached as attachment 1 to the report this evening. It essentially establishes the roles and responsibilities to govern that relationship between council and town staff. The intent behind the policy is to try to set ethical standards, high ethical standards to regulate relations between staff and council. The attempt is to try to steward good governance and maintain public confidence in the administration of the town. When you review the policy, it supplements and works in conjunction with other existing town policies, namely council's code of conduct, the rules of employee conduct, workplace violence and harassment policy, use of corporate resources policy, and the procedural bylaw. So again, we're looking for, in the recommendations, look for council to receive this report and that the council staff relations policy in the form attached be approved, and further that the clerk be authorized as and when needed to make minor updates to the council staff relations policy in order to remain compliant with other policies and legislative amendments as those amendments and changes occur. If council has any questions, I'd be happy to try to answer those.
All right, a motion to approve. Councillor Houston and Councillor Dorner on the motion. All in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. We'll move on to the revision to committee application appointments policy number 4.
Thank you again, Mr. Mayor, and to council. So back in 2014, council first adopted this application and appointment policy. Main goal is to establish timelines for the calling and receiving application and to set in place a process for reviewing those applications and selecting persons to be appointed to the respective committees of council. The council may remember by way of reports on December 13th, 2022 and March 28th, 2023, council received reports of administration and supported the discontinuance of a number of committees, the Cultural and Arts Advisory Committee, Senior Advisory Committee, Youth Advisory Committee, and the Heritage Community or Heritage Committee. So as a result, the first set of revisions with this policy and the policies attached with the noted changes in red line, but the first part of the revisions was simply to reflect the fact and make the changes to the policy to reflect the fact that some of the committees have been discontinued. And upon further review of the policy, there's a couple of other additional changes that are being recommended. The first change relates to the calling of applications. So currently, the policy states that a call for applications shall occur in October of each year. And that the application forms, or sorry, I believe it's September. The application forms are required, I believe, by the end of October. And it's couched in mandatory language. It's recommended instead that the change be made that the mandatory references to September and October are being removed, and that the clerk's provided with greater flexibility to call for applications when it's simply practical to do so. So when there's vacancies, and that vacancy needs to be filled, whether it's urgent or whether it's not an urgent matter, but the clerk can call for applications when and as needed. The second or further recommended revision provides council the option. So right now, council at the beginning of that term, the clerk initiates the process, and council receives the applications to the various committees, and council reviews and makes those appointments. Further revision that we've changed is to allow council the opportunity, should it wish to do so, to appoint a striking committee of its own to review those applications and bring recommendations to council as a whole on those proposed appointments to the various committees. It's just an option that's available for council, but at least there's the flexibility should that be desired. And then the last couple changes, and it's really just confirming. The last revision relates to confirming in the policy that any discussions or deliberations on applications may take place in closed session based on the advice of the town clerk. And but then reiterating in the policy that while those discussions and deliberations take place in closed session, all committee and local board appointments will continue to be made in a public meeting of council. And that's about it. The remainder of the revisions recommended are with respect to some language changes and clarifying the application process and the public notice requirements. If council has any questions, I'd be pleased to answer them. The recommendations, just looking for the report to be received and that the revisions as outlined in this report be approved.
Thank you, Mayor. Just to clarify, Mr. Auger, the discussions and deliberations over the applications, I always said that, if we're discussing individuals that are identifiable or part of the application should always closed session. So now that opportunity will allow council to, talk about applications if need be, but it says based on the advice of the town solicitor. So what does that mean? Maybe to clarify that portion.
And that just provides council with an opportunity if there's some question as to whether the matter should be discussed in closed session or not. And council can certainly consult with the town clerk on that matter. But to your point, Mr. Deputy Mayor, yes, if it's discussions about identifiable individuals, then the discussion can be had in closed session. But if there's some question, certainly resort can be had to the clerk for that.
All right, good. Thank you.
For the questions, go ahead, Councilor Houston.
Thank you, Worship. To Mr. OJ, just regarding the striking committee, I'm not opposed to that, and I think it's maybe an opportunity for some further engagement. But I'm just questioning with the appointment of a striking committee, does that fall under that, or would it be a separate policy for the choosing of who that striking committee is, or how would that work?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. It would be at council's discretion. The language has in the revised policy has been purposely left broad to simply provide council with that option, but then council would need to provide direction as to who amongst themselves would be appointed to that committee, and some of the other information such as timelines for that striking committee to come back upon their review. So we left that up to the discretion of council. Certainly, if it's council's wish, we can put into place more defined language, but we thought it was best at this point to leave it general.
Further questions or comments? The only comment I would make is, as we define exactly in terms of the striking committee and so forth. The one thing that I would be looking at, maybe some guidance there, Mr. Clerk, is to take the politics out of it. And because it's been known in the past and in other areas when they had striking committees in that politics plays a role in it. And we shouldn't have politics play a role in it. It should be on the merits of the people that make the applications. And so if it's, the composition, I think is where we need a little bit of work in terms of when the applications come in and to verify to make sure that, we're choosing the right folks to do the right job for obviously the committee. But my biggest thing is to make sure that whatever we do is that we take the politics out of it. Okay. No further questions or comments, then on the report. Move. Oh, it's been moved and supported. Sorry. So all in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Okay. Next is the town of Tecumseh sale of surplus land policy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you to council. The town currently has enforced bylaw 2003-09, and that's the current bylaw to establish procedures for the sale of surplus real property. Along with the town's alley closing policy, the current surplus property bylaw was recommended for review and updates. And certainly as part of that review, I think it's fair to say that the current bylaw is dated, and in further reviewing the bylaw, there were elements of that bylaw in which there was it didn't provide for a consistent process to follow when the town undertakes to declare a town property as surplus. And so definitely as part of this process, and as this report spells out, we are recommending that council consider essentially a brand new policy to replace the bylaw. Again, section 270, the section of the Municipal Act that mandates certain policies and procedures that municipalities are to have in place. One of the policies, again, is Section 270 requires all municipalities to have a policy on with respect to the sale or disposition of land. So again, the proposed policy attached to this report, if approved by council, would therefore replace the existing bylaw. Besides being dated and in need of an update, the current bylaw, again, because it did not provide, it does not always provide for consistent application. The current bylaw is more couched in general language, which does, we found, lend itself, you know, to more interpretation of the intent of the bylaw. And obviously, whenever there's interpretation of the bylaw, that invariably leads to you know, inconsistent application from one property to the next. So that was the main purposes behind the introduction of this new policy. A summary of the key provisions of the new policy. Section 2, certainly the scope. There's much greater clarification as to which town properties would be captured or would be included as part of the surplus property policy, and which ones would not. So for example, sale of lands for tax arrears would already have its processes in place. Lands transferred by the town pursuant to a development agreement would not fall under the policy. And so the noted exceptions have been delineated in this policy, which was definitely not the case with the existing bylaw. Section 5.1, certainly the goal of this new policy is to ensure more consistency in its application, more standardization. However, at the end of the day, council, and this section is a reminder of that, council still reserves the right or the privilege to, you know, to adjust, waive, or you know, make changes to the policy or refuse any property for sale. So council still has that overriding discretion, notwithstanding the fact, the goal of the policy, because there's going to be certain circumstances where unique circumstances where council may waive, you know, a section of the policy from applying. So council still has that discretion. And so the policy does confirm that. Section 5.3, oh, sorry, 5.2. The new policy, and I believe it's a schedule to, sorry, the new policy provides guidance to council in stating what considerations should be made when deciding to declare and sell surplus land. So such things as, you know, ensuring that streamlined process, where possible, trying to institute a fair and competitive bidding. Those are just two of the considerations that should guide council. And the reason why we have those points of guidance, again, is even at the council level to try to ensure some consistency in the application, whether to declare that property as surplus, under what circumstances to sell that property, what price. So it provides some additional guidance for council, which was lacking from before. Section 5.3 provides that council, after receiving a report, either written or verbal, shall, if it so wishes, declare a property to be surplus by way of resolution at a regular meeting of council. 5.4, section 5.4. The new policy provides greater flexibility and clarification of the notice requirements when council intends to sell or dispose of the land, that has been declared as surplus. 5.5, there's greater flexibility as to the requirements for a fair market value appraisal. The appraisal, one key change from the previous bylaw, the appraisal requirement is now required prior to council's decision to declare as surplus that property, as opposed to prior to the sale of the property. Further, appraisals for small value properties and those estimated to be less than 10,000 are not necessary, and updated appraisals are required if that appraisal is now older than 2 years. 5.8. The new policy confirms that there's a variety of methods of sale that council can choose, whether that's using the multiple listing service, whether that's public auction by tender, RFP, RFQ, or even by direct sale. 5.9, and certainly this is something I've noted in the past that was lacking with previous policies, but one I think which is of practical use. The new policy provides the Director Legislative Services with the authority to extend or revise a closing date or a conditions date in the purchase agreement without needing council approval each time, as long as that extension does not change the intent of the approved disposal. So sometimes there may be some due diligence that has a 30-day deadline, a 40-day, maybe there's an environmental assessment that needs to be conducted. And the parties need an extension of that, either of the condition date and the closing date itself. And there might be 2 or 3 occurrences where, work is continuing. And certainly if the intent on both parties is still obvious, then there's the ability to do that without the need to go back to council each time an amendment to the date is required. So it would certainly provide for some flexibility in that scenario. 5.11, any properties designated as a heritage property cannot be disposed without first a report from the Director of Planning Services. 5.12, policy provides more guidance on what the disposal price should be, establishing a minimum disposal price, but with the flexibility for up to a 10% variance from such minimum price without needing further council approval. If the variance is greater than 10%, then administration would be coming back to council to receive approval for that price. Section 5.14, the new policy makes clear that unless negotiated otherwise in the offer of purchase, it is the purchaser who's responsible for all town costs incurred and attributable to the sale of the subject property. And then a couple of final sections to note, 516 and 517. Council may, again, and confirming, council may meet in closed session for discussions on the sale or disposal. However, any sale or disposal of the surplus property must be ratified or approved in open session by way of a bylaw at a regular meeting. So that's just a general overview. Again, the intent was to provide for a more detailed process and to anticipate some of the issues that may come up when declaring a property as surplus. So if council has any questions, I'd be happy to try to answer those.
All right, thank you very much. Questions, comments? Move. Councilor Tonya moves. Councilor Houston support. And on the motion, all in favor? Opposed, if any? That is carried. Alley closing and sale policy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is the other element for review. We just looked at the surplus land policy, and we also engaged to conduct a review of the alley closing policy. The current policy, town's alley closing policy, currently is number 99, and that's part of the attachments. Again, it was recommended for review and revision. And again, similar to the surplus land property, after the review was conducted, it was the recommendation of administration is certainly that there be an overhaul of the current policy in order to clarify some gaps and provide better direction with various scenarios that could arise during the alley closing process. So certainly administration's recommending that council give consideration to adopting the new alley closing policy as attached, but just wanted to provide a quick summary of some of the aspects of this policy. And part of the reason why this review came about is administration has had to apply the current policy in respect to a couple of current and recent alley closing files. And certainly myself included, through working on those referenced files, what certainly became apparent is that the current policy fails to provide enough specifics from a process point of view in order to make that policy really a true guiding document. It doesn't address many of the elements or issues that often come up in alley closing matters. Again, leaving the clerk in a position of trying to interpret the current policy. And again, as soon as one is in a position of having to interpret a policy, it certainly can lead to inconsistent application from one file to the next. So that's currently, I mean, that's part of the intent here, is to provide a more reliable process, not just for administration, obviously, but for the residents that have requested and made application to have their alleyways, to have the alleys closed and to purchase same. What the current policy also fails in is providing better time parameters. And I say that knowing that, you know, each file is going to be different from one alley closing to the next. There's going to be different considerations and may require different periods of time. But the current policy had no time parameters set. The policy that we're proposing has time parameters set. Those are not cast in concrete or stone or whatever the expression is, but it's there to signal to the residents, to the applicants, and to administration. The intent of the policy is to ensure each of these steps along the way continue to move. You know, so if there's a requirement for the closure bylaw to be brought to council within 45 days, and for some reason that's not possible, then it would still come to the next meeting. The goal is to ensure that the file keeps moving, and that was something that was lacking from interpreting the current policy. So that was an issue, and then the current policy more or less utilizes an all or nothing approach to alley closures, whereby all of the adjacent landowners must agree to buy their directly abutting share of their alley, failing which the closure and sale of the entire alleyway fails. Current policy failed to address the potential for other options. Perhaps the owner on the opposite side who's directly abutting would like to purchase that if the other owner says no. Perhaps directly adjacent landowners might want the opportunity to purchase that section. And then there's the possibility for scenarios where you know, only part or sections of the alleyway are closed without the necessity. So it didn't provide for that flexibility for that scenario when one owner says no. And case in point, you know, the two recent alley files that administration's been working on had inordinate delays because of the difficulty in trying to get all of the landowners to yes. So this policy is intended to be a little bit more flexible on that point. Just a couple of points on the policy. The new proposed policy is applicable to any rights of way. So that could mean alleys, streets, or road allowances. The following is a summary of the procedure itself. So first, the abutting owner who wishes to purchase the right of way completes a request for a title search, and that would be on a town prescribed form, together with a fee for that title search. What the applicant receives, or the abutting owner receives at that point, which was, I guess, missing from the process before, right at the beginning, early, the applicant who's trying to find out potentially about whether, you know, it wants to purchase the alleyway, they'll receive an informational brochure that kind of outlines the process, what to expect throughout the process, and at least an estimate as to the usual timelines. And that way the landowner early on has that information, and at least, you know, some of the mystery involved has gone away. They can know what to expect on that file. So the abutting order makes that request for the title search, receives the informational brochure on the process for closing and conveying an alley or right away. Within 30 days after receiving that title search request, the Director of Legislative Services conducts the search and circulates the results to internal town departments, obtains comments for review and determination as to whether the subject alley should be closed and conveyed. The director, besides receiving comments from other departments at the town, is also to have regard to what we call the alley classification guidelines, and that's attached as a schedule to the policy. But it outlines those considerations that should be made, again, in whether to recommend to council the closing of the alley. And certainly this will help to ensure, again, some consistency in making recommendations itself to council from time to time, from alleyway to alleyway. If the director decides that the alley should not be closed, the applicant will be notified, and we'll also have a 7-day period to appeal the decision to council. The applicant will simply appeal by providing correspondence outlining their reasons for the appeal, and that will go on the next available regular council meeting agenda. Council will receive that correspondence and decide by resolution whether to support or not support the appeal, with council's decision being final at that time. If the director decides instead that the alley, or recommends that the alley may be closed, then the applicant at that point, within 30 days, must submit a formal application to close that street or alleyway. And again, there's a proposed application fee with that process of $200. Within 30 days after that formal application being filed, the clerk will now circulate the application to external parties, other utility companies. There could be other organizations, maybe IRCA, but the goal, again, within 30 days to obtain comments if any concerns or any issues that could affect the title to that property that's being proposed to be closed and conveyed from the town to the participating landowners. Within 45 days after that, the director will prepare a report and bring before council with its for council's consideration, and there'll be a recommendation as to whether the alley should be closed and conveyed. At this council meeting, which abutting landowners would be provided notice of, council will either decide to support or not support the report. If the closure is supported, then council, as part of its as part of its directing resolution, will direct the director further to prepare and send to each owner within 30 days a notice and prescribed form advising each of the abutting owners of the opportunity to purchase and providing an estimate of the cost to close and convey the respective portions of the alleyway. And again, this is on the assumption that each abutting landowner would have the opportunity to purchase that portion of the alleyway that they directly abut on. As well, the notice will then ask each owner to indicate in writing within a specified period of time whether they accept or non-accept the purchase and estimate. Upon acceptance by a majority of the landowners, so not all of the landowners, but by a majority, the requisite bylaw will be prepared and brought to council for approval. Within 60 days after the bylaw has passed, the director then will take further steps to have any applicable title documents registered, deeds will be prepared, signed and registered by the approving landowners. And then upon completion of all those prior steps, notice is provided that the matter has been completed, there's been registration on title, and copies of those documents, including the deed, are then provided to the successful applicants. And again, and this was the point from earlier, the new proposed policy provides for other options to be considered, from offering the alley portion to other abutting owners to options not requiring the conveyance of the whole of the alley or right away. So that's the, and again, that is to provide some flexibility in trying to, meet the request when you have a majority of landowners who wish to purchase, and a situation where there's one or two landowners who simply do not wish to purchase. So that's kind of just an overview. It was a little bit of a broad overview, but certainly if council has any questions, I can try to answer those.
Questions. I do have one question. If, you said the majority of landowners, are in compliance or they want to purchase, but, and I think in the references as well, you were saying, that they have to line up, obviously, every property owner and so forth. But if I have a neighbor that says, I'm not interested and so forth, adjacent, and I'm saying, yeah, I'd like mine, and could I purchase that piece?
Yeah, I mean, certainly in a situation where the property, you're directly abutting owner on the opposite side says no, you would next, and they would be advised that you would then next have the opportunity to purchase their portion as well. But the policy is intended to be flexible, even in that's if there's other scenarios that could present itself. So you could have an owner directly adjacent who may have an interest in purchasing that piece. So it's designed to try to attempt to resolve the matter without it coming to a complete standstill.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, through you, Mayor. Just a question regarding the date for the adoption of this policy. I know in the past we've had some alley closings in limbo and some are in the process. Do we have any on the go or on the docket now where by approving this, can we kind of cue it into this policy, or do they have to finish and start over? Because I know there's some in the past that we've dealt with.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the Deputy Mayor. We have two current files, but both files, the bylaws to close and convey have already been passed. So we're just working out the final, actually the one matter has closed. The larger alley matter is working its way to completion soon. So those have already gone to council. So there's none that are applicable. We're certainly hoping in the recommendations to receive the report, we're hoping that council gives approval to this as part of the September 12th meeting. So this would become effect just after that.
Thank you.
Out of curiosity too, just those, I know there are a lot of well, not all of them, but some of the alleys that have their utilities in the yard. Is there a, I say easement that'll come with that in terms of, there's obviously accessibility to, because I think most of the utilities there, it's a primary going through the alley.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, certainly. And, one of the current alley matters does have a bell easement. And so that easement has been registered and the owners are put on notice of that, of the extent. And so with this policy, that would come out and be communicated to the residents fairly early in the process as a result of that initial search. When they come in, they request that title search. We're looking for verification at that point so that can be communicated, and hopefully before the resident makes that formal application and pays that proposed fee that goes with that.
Okay, any further questions? Then motion, Councillor Tonio, Councillor Jobin, all in favor? Opposed, if any, that is carried. Okay. Thank you for being very patient and very quiet, and Now the floor is yours, and it's on the social media policy.
Thank you, Your Worship, and good afternoon, members of the council. So policy 80, the social media policy, as you indicated, is something we brought before council 10 years ago. And a few things have changed in 10 years. Gone from 2 social media channels to a dozen or so now within the organization. In addition to the organization itself, we have used to be communications by committee back then, and now we have fortunate enough to have staff and experts on staff to help us with this type of thing now. So Amanda McKenzie, and thank you to Reagan too, our summer co-op who assisted with the updating of the policy that outlines who it applies to, including staff and council and members of the public, in addition to other practices we've had in place over the years, but never had it formally within the existing policy. So Amanda McKenzie will go over the proposed changes with you now. Thank you.
Thank you. Through the mayor, we're pleased to bring forward the report today to the Policies and Priorities Committee, TCS 2023-04, as Sean mentioned, the social media policy. And yes, it has been 10 years since the original policy was established. So obviously it's timely to bring forward a revision at this point. The town policy was first implemented with the intent to establish guidelines that govern the use of social media to further the business purposes of the town of Tecumseh, as well as to mitigate risk and protect the image of the town at all times when using the social media tools. Obviously, since then, things have changed. So the channels have evolved and expanded, as Sean has said, and as such, policy updates are required to ensure that the expectations for the administration of and participation on town social media channels are very clear and current. This policy applies to town employees, members of council, members of boards and committees, volunteers, and members of the public who engage with the town via our social media channels. Overall, the social media policy serves as a proactive measure to create a positive online experience for both the organization, as well as, like I said, minimize risk and ensure transparent expectations for use, both in a professional capacity, but also as participants on social media platforms. The approach that was taken to update the town of Tecumseh social media policy involved reviewing the existing policy to determine the applicability and relevance of the content that was within the existing policy, a scan and review of existing policies from Canadian municipalities, and researching general policy provisions related to social media and digital content within the professional standards. The primary goals of the town's social use of social media were substantially revised, and I'm going to outline them as follows. To increase resident access to and engagement with their local government, build stronger relationships with local organizations and other municipal governments, facilitate enhanced customer service, increase resident trust in their local government, tailor communications to specific audiences, enhance the town's reputation and image, manage and clarify information, provide responsive communication to the public in case of emergencies, and to serve as an education medium for town departments to increase resident awareness and access to information about our services. I'd like to note that consistent with the original policy, the town's website will remain the primary online resource for information. Social media will be used to complement this information found on the town's website and broaden the reach of our corporate messages through the social media tools. The scope of application for the social media policy was also updated and is outlined as follows. The policy applies to all employees of the town of Tecumseh authorized to post information on town social media platforms in an official capacity. It applies to all members of town council who utilize social media in their official capacity as representatives of the town. All social media users who interact with the town on its official social media platforms, all employees who identify themselves as being employees of the town on their personal social media, all employees of the town of Tecumseh who otherwise utilize their personal social media to interact with the town or who are otherwise identifiable as town employee while using their personal social media. It also applies to town-appointed committee or board members and volunteers who utilize social media in their position when they serve the town. The social media policy in its revised state is organized by the following sections aimed to facilitate effective understanding and application. The sections are divided into existing social media platforms, use of town social media, use of social media by members of town council, personal use of social media by employees, personal use of social media by committee and board members and volunteers, and also a section that speaks to IT and security provisions. I'd like to take just a few moments to highlight some administrative components of the policy from a broad perspective. Specifically within section 6.0, the policy states that use of town social media by any department must be approved by the communications officer. It also states that authorized employees will be responsible for moderating and monitoring the submission of comments received by members of the public on the social media platforms. With respect to responsiveness and hours of operation, per section 8.2 and 8.3 of the customer service policy, the town will respond to online inquiries during regular business hours, Monday to Friday, 8:30 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. And questions and comments will be acknowledged within one business day. With respect to submitting content for publishing and resharing, there is a form that is posted on our internal forms and will be posted on the intranet when that is launched for access to the communications officer. If you wish to submit content to be posted to town social media, you must make a request through this form to the communications officer. Requesting a new town social media account will also go through the communications officer. Speaking to an audit and review process, a review of those currently authorized to have access to the town social media channels must occur every calendar year or every time a previous employee leaves the town. So with respect to the recommendations that are before you today, it's recommended that report TCS 2023-04 entitled the Town of Tecumseh Social Media Policy be received, and the attachment 1 to the report, which is the revised policy 80 social media, be recommended by the Policies and Priorities Committee for approval and adoption at the September 12th, 2023 regular meeting of council. And we're happy to field any questions you may have.
All right, thank you very much. Any questions or comments at this time? Go ahead, Councilor Houston, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you for the report. I've read it through. I really don't have too many questions because it's quite extensive and it lays it all out. The only question I have is social media is 24 hours, and I know that we've put in and I realize what our working hours are, but if there is offensive posts, or if there are things that are being posted after hours and any of us do see it, who should we contact? What do we do with that? My only concern is that then sits out there for, potentially 6, 8, 10 hours, right? And it's viewed. So if it does happen, how are we prepared to handle, that after hours?
Through the mayor, yes. So there is a side of this where there's through direct messages, and that's more what the policy speaks to, where if there's a question asked or something put forward about a service or a complaint, that those responses are within one business day. If there's a situation where there is some sort of issue that is arising, that there's a thread that needs to be monitored, that is something that currently we are doing, and that we can take a look at how we might build that into the communications policy. That will be something that we're bringing forward as well.
Thank you. And I guess further to that, if you can just communicate to us who, I don't know if we should just go to Sean and, email, or if there's an email we should have set up if we see something like that, because we're all kind of on social media, and if we can help with that, just let us know where we should be directing those to, so that, they'll be pulled off and addressed. So that's the only comment I would make.
Yes, for sure. Thanks to the mayor. We will take that back and let you know.
Go ahead, Deputy.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to thank, again, through Sean and your team of communications there, putting out communication for the residents, such as whether you be on a county with all the road construction, all that resharing does help, because even though people are inconvenienced, they're frustrated, but if they know a day or two advance something's going to be closed or whatever, they'll make alternate plans. It's when they find out after the fact, and it took a little bit of while, but I encourage keep communication open with various organizations, departments, whether it be the BIA or Essex Power. Any information like that goes well with communicating to the public. One point, I know our council is good with this. We have those community groups. Tecumseh comes together. We have Lakeshore Neighbors. We have LaSalle Community. I'm dealing with an issue at the county right now where, a municipality where someone puts an incident and they start replying, and there was an elected official who's not even on, try to fix it, because councilors, we want to fix things, and responds with a discussion they had with a director that now put the staff of that corporation upset, because the union's involved, saying you're giving this information out to the public now. So we have to be careful, as a council. Like I said, if I get something, it's, is the fireworks going to be canceled due to rain, and I know that, and it's 5 o'clock, and I'll put yes or no, very factual, but to engage, it's a no-win. And so I know that's a difficult task to go, but there is these large community groups out there that try to get us to comment. And the best thing to do is pick up the phone, call us, or email. So just a kind of note for that. Thank you.
Go ahead, Councillor Jobin.
Yes, thank you through Mr. Mayor. Thank you for the presentation. I like to use the social media because we don't have a local newspaper. I don't like to use it to engage with negative tones or debate. I encourage residents to come to council if they have something they really want to present, or call us on a professional level and have a discussion with the proper department. So I won't engage in that debating or that toxic language in any of the neighborhood groups. I just won't. So I like to share when we have information that is direct to our residents, because again, we don't have a local newspaper, and we encourage them, hey, I won't even debate on that. Here's the information, facts, dates, time, meetings, and so I appreciate when that comes around. And as the season is changing too, I will just maybe even send something your way, something that happens in my ward every year. And we do have to say it every year because there's new people that move in and out of the town and into my area. Rural mailboxes. It is a great time that they look at them now before the snow comes. So that is something, even the communication can come from our departments where they're like, oh, you know what's coming? We're getting our plows ready. You know what happens in the community? People forget A, B, and C. Let's start reminding them now. So even our head departments could come to a mindset too, where they start to think, oh gosh, we're going to get these calls coming up. Let's start to prepare the mindset of our residents. So that's what I like to utilize it for. Positive, healthy information message to just go forward in a good way. Thank you.
Ditto. Any further questions or certainly comments? Okay, motion about the policy. Councillor Dorner, Councillor Tonio, all in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. Thank you very much for this, and I think it's great food for thought. Finished business? New business? Go ahead.
Yeah, just on new business, a question for our clerk. Maybe advice on best practice. Let's say we receive an email, a complaint, or a question from a resident, and they give consent to share it with all the council as an FYI. And sometimes we do that. Get a message from the resident, forward FYI. So all the council is aware of that email. Then is a good advice to, and what I try to do is reply to sender, which would be, if there's a reply to a director, to administration, so that it doesn't constitute that electronic meeting. Because I was told that when you reply to all, and as much as we all want to think it's just amongst us, it constitutes a meeting. So if you can clarify the do's and don'ts to do that, just to caution us if it's okay or not okay, or what do you advise us when those things happen?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, and to the deputy mayor, you did properly allude to it. Certainly the preference is to avoid replying to all, because certainly that increases the chances that there's material discussion by the councillors, which could be deemed as being a meeting without proper public notice. So that would certainly be the preference. And I think depending, it's kind of a general question, but depending on the nature of the question or concern from the resident, it might be something that's more appropriate for City Works. So it kind of depends on the scenario, but your reference to avoiding all of them, all council members included on any of that discussion would definitely be preferable.
This also goes for a director. Say a director gives us a briefing note, an email on an update, whether it be parks or the arena. And then if we have questions, we would reply to send it to that director specifically. Is it a practice you advise to do, correct? Or because again, my concern is if I do hit reply to all, then am I guilty of discussing?
That's general.
So through
information.
Yeah.
That's why I'm asking.
Go ahead.
To the mayor, to council, I think that it depends on the situation. If there is a question on a report and you are wanting to seek some clarification from the director, you can certainly engage with that director, but I would encourage you, and we all do, to bring that question to the floor of council and ask the director at the appropriate time so that all of council has the benefit of the answer, and any debate that occurs, which forwards the business of council, occurs in session.
Yeah, I just want to add that because if they don't like your answer, they're going to go to the next one, to the next one, to the next one. And so that's why I think to the CAOs, I think that brings it right to the floor, and then it's properly debated. Any further new business? Then, if not, then adjournment's in order. Councilor Houston, move. Councilor Jobin, support. All in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Thank you very much. Okay.